you know, I've never really bought into the fact that people claim, of course, that Meghan Markle is this great, well, entrepreneur, world leader. You know, I've often seen her really, and I mean this in the kindest of ways, chums, as something of a Duchess of disaster. The biggest mistake, though, in my opinion, that she made was, well, really sort of ostracising some of the people that could have been very useful. I mean, I would suggest that the biggest royal grifter, in my opinion, and this is my opinion, and I can say this, of course, is none other than Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York. And I mean that with love, clearly. You see, the thing is, when you look at Sarah, I mean, what she's done has been very clever. 30 years really since she separated from Prince Andrew, and a little bit like Meghan, was only really in the royal family in the highlighted sense for a very short period. But very cleverly, Sarah has managed to cling on, utilising the royal title and associations, the stories with Diana, you know, the sort of thing. And when you look at it also, the bigger picture that I find fascinating is the fact that nobody's really pointed that out. Now, why is Meghan Markle not very clever? Well, you see, with all the struggles that Meghan has gone through, trying to reinstate herself as some great intellectual mind, and, you know, when she sat down with Bloomberg and all of that sort of stuff and was pointing out, you know, the algorithms and all that, you think, no, you've no idea what you're doing. You're a bit part actress who struck lucky by marrying rich. And once you've married rich, and this is what happens with a lot of people, they seem to think then that they've got this great sort of glowing sort of thing to be able to tell you that, well, I know what I'm doing because look at where I am. You know, as I've often said here on the show, chums, people that you have to admire. And in fact, you know, you look at different people like that, but people that you have to admire are people, say, like Madonna, whether you like her music or not. She really struck out in a time where, you know, she really worked hard, she went around the clubs, she got her music heard, she fought for a record deal, trampled over people without a shadow of a doubt, but she got there through sheer graft. A lot of people just married rich. Madonna, if you think about it, married Sean Penn. Yes, you know, a bit of a bad boy and great for her image and all that sort of stuff. But by that point, she was very much set up on her own. Meghan Markle was midway into her 30s at this point, she's claiming. And then, of course, you know, things weren't going particularly well. There were no great deals. And people forget that she was hawking herself around, literally, in sort of reality shows over here in the United Kingdom. You see, she realised that the flame had burned out very quickly in Hollywood, and so by her being a Hollywood star, of which her and her management team and the original PR team perpetuated at great length, well, this was going to get her into things like Strictly Come Dancing, Made in Chelsea, perhaps even I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. She was looking for something bigger. She found it when she found the guy that was, well, as long as he's kind, but you know, we know that story now. So why the Duchess of York and Meghan? Well, you see, if you remember with Meghan, she famously told this story, didn't she, that, of course, the Duchess of York, Sarah, was the one that helped her practice a curtsy. And here's where it gets really intricate, you see, where people do miss these little bon mots, as I like to call them, because Sarah very much refuted this story. Now, as I've often said here on the show before, this is just a bunch of serial liars, because there you have Princess Eugenie, still friendly with Prince Harry, right? And now suddenly friendly with Meghan Markle. Her first name is Princess, right? Princess Eugenie, and apparently Meghan had no idea about her father, the monarchy, or anything. I mean, you know, how dim does she think some of us are? Where this bit gets interesting is the fact that clearly she could have dealt, you know, something a little bit better. And then, of course, the Duchess of York said, well, I don't really know her. I don't really remember meeting her. Meghan's version of events is that in that now infamous curtsy that we saw on Netflix, well, apparently that was all down to Fergie. But now quickly backtracking because, of course, Fergie and Andrew are toxic. So she doesn't want anything to do with them. No. But as I said at the start of the video, what's interesting is Meghan could have learned a lot about the art of grift, because Sarah Ferguson has signed herself up to things like Weight Watchers. She's done an interview with, of course, Oprah Winfrey. And unlike Meghan, they hadn't proved to be toxic. You see, you know, obviously Oprah Winfrey thought this is massive at the time, getting the Duchess of York not only to sit down and chat to her, but pour out her heart. She signs up to things like Weight Watchers, I remember when I was first at NBC, they signed Sarah Ferguson and she cost them a fortune because they got a royal name. Very quickly they realised that Sarah was very clever in utilising the name but not actually telling you anything. You know, there was no spillage about the Queen or Prince Philip or as he then was, the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, but you know, just because they were sat there, Meghan has had to dish out far more for far less. Now, you might say, well, why is this even worse? Well, look at it again. If you look at the Duchess of York, she has made, and some suspect, gone through millions. And like the Duchess of York, the real sort of factor for her was the fact that she was once married to Prince Andrew, the Queen's son. Meghan Markle's parallels are very, very similar. She is married to the grandson of the late Queen. You couldn't have a better start. But things have really gone wrong on a bigger scale, and this is why I would wanted to share this with you about really how she's now become, quite frankly, the Duchess of Disaster. And what I'm about to reveal, well, even you may be now left thinking, what? Oh yes. Welcome to a brand new episode of By Royal Appointment. It's lovely to have your company. This is your show where I delve in a little deeper, tell you some of the things that are going on in the background that you may or may not have known. Of course, there's lots of speculative rumour out there, as we all see on a daily basis. The royal family are fascinating simply because they are a soap opera unfolding. And people say, oh, this is a modern day age. This is what happens in the 21st century. No, no, no. If you go back to the court of, for instance, Henry VIII, similar thing. This just didn't go around as quickly as it does now. Everybody was always fascinated with what went on inside the British monarchy. And I would say that this really kicked off all thanks to the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, Wallis and David, Mr. Edward and Mrs. Simpson. At that point, this was as the papers dubbed it, the greatest love story never told. And this is where Meghan Markle's now trying to sort of change this trajectory. But it's not working out particularly well. One of the bits that I like that's gone on behind the scenes at Netflix, and I find this fascinating because it's a very simple thing. If you are making a business, say if you and I were doing a business and say one of us had some public profile, you have to look at what your public profile is, what sells, and more importantly, what do people know you as? Again, sorry to go back to this, but when you look at Madonna, you just know there's only one Madonna. For many years, there was only one Kylie until she fought that with Kylie Jenner. Remember Kylie Minogue, Kylie Jenner, because that's a brand name. People lock into that, and if they like your music, your wine, the clothes that you're endorsing, whatever, they may look at you. Now, Meghan Markle made a massive fatal mistake, and this is one of many for the Duchess of Disaster, because earlier this year, as we know, she sat down opposite the, Oscar-winning actress Drew Barrymore. Now, I've met Drew Barrymore, lovely lady, a little bit, ditzy, but just a nice girl, no sides to her, a little bit clingy, but, a little bit Hollywood, you get that sort of thing. But I liked her, she was honest, and she basically said what she thought, and we know all about her troubles from being a young child star on things like E.T. and stuff like that. But what was interesting was Meghan and her team at the time insisted, following on from the debacle that was, the launch of this brand name, Meghan Sussex. And the whole reason behind this was the previous team that Meghan had before they got fired, those people. Well, the previous team apparently thought this was a good idea to have the Sussex brand name, Sussex Royal, that sort of stuff. Now, Meghan really pushed hard. As I told you in a previous interview, she originally thought not about, Meghan Sussex, but becoming Meghan Spencer. She felt the Spencer name would resonate with the Princess Diana audience across the United States of America, where she's very much still revered, as she is in many, many parts of the world, Of course, Diana's story is one of a tortured soul with a rather checkered background. We can't forget that she was no angel also. But what I find interesting is, and people often say this to me, there's two sides. Of course there is. There's Camilla's side, but of course when you look at Camilla's side also, one might suspect, if you think about it in different times, that if that was the period now, then that would never have happened, if you like, simply because we're in more enlightened times, you know. A different time. People were not allowed to step out of their lane, as they say. Look at Princess Margaret and Captain Peter Townsend, you know. That would have been a totally different story, say, in the 80s or 90s. But in the 1950s and 1960s, you were not allowed to do certain things. Meghan, now free in the digital world, thought she could just change her name. That was it. We were now going to accept her, and basically, as she told Mindy Kaling in that fake kitchen and that fake cooking show, well, you know, I'm Meghan Sussex, and that was the end of that. You know, we were supposed to say, oh, right. But the bigger problem that nobody wanted to tell her, and this is the story really behind the failure of the CEO for originally, what was it called? American Riviera Orchard, right? Well, the problem with that, it was no person, no CEO of any worth wanted to come forward. And this is really simply because when you think about it, you know, why would you want to be associated with an unknown brand? Most big CEOs come in when something's very successful, whether you've had a string of hit records or, you know, big movies, and suddenly you've got a production company. Well, Meghan wanted the biggie cheese from the off because she's clueless and had no idea. Now, again, where this is interesting was everybody told Meghan Markle that the way to sell her brand would be to utilize the you know, the Meghan Markle. For some explicable reason, now she wants to distance herself from that name. Yet, that's the only name that people go through the digital platforms. Now, I mean this kindly, chums, because you're like me, the algorithms, right? Now, we all, you know, we now know what they are, but, you know, when somebody said that to me, I thought, no, I'm taking tablets, I'm fine, thanks. But the thing is, the algorithms are what people look for. So if you say, for instance, like you look for Hollywood greats, it might pop up with Humphrey Bogart, Ava Gardner, Marilyn Monroe. You see how that works. The algorithm pushes you to that. The algorithm pushed everybody to look for Meghan Markle. She didn't want that. She wanted to be American Riviera Orchard and then As Ever. But they said, no, the only way people are going to find your brand is if it is Meghan Markle. She flatly refused and then went with As Ever. Now, you have to remember that Netflix, equally clueless in this department, right, of selling anything other than streaming, making movies and that sort of product. They didn't know about, you know, Shopify and wines and you know what I'm saying. They didn't know any of that, so consequently they took light from her. They felt, Ted Sarandos allegedly, felt that she was a big enough name that people would follow her regardless. But it's not about that, it's about what you look for online. So consequently, as she snapped back at the woman at Bloomberg Originals, and she said, no, they sold out in 44 minutes, not an hour. I thought, do keep up, Emily, you know, shape up, sister. The thing is, that's really the reason why things aren't taking off, because nobody knows to look for As Ever. Does anybody? If you were thinking of jam, would you type in As Ever? You would type in Meghan Markle jam. Eventually, lower down, it will come up. But at this point in time, when you really need sales, you need to make it as simple and as simplistic that you possibly can for the people relevant to you. You get the picture. Meghan wasn't having any of it. So Netflix went along with that. This then proved an unmitigated disaster sales-wise, because not only had she changed the name from the fluffy thing and the lemon stuff in the kitchen, the fake kitchen dancing, but Meghan's piece de resistance was that she thought if she portrayed and curated a soundtrack of music that we all liked, and it has to be said, some of the songs are very good, don't exactly mean anything to the product that she's now, you know, trying to sell, but nonetheless the music's pleasant enough. But again, she missed the boat on that because they suggested doing a Spotify stroke, you know, playlist, or indeed an Apple playlist, but His Majesty the King got there better and more successfully. Again, another thing slipping through the Duchess of Disaster's fingers. Well, where did Harry fit into this? Well, of course, he was useful idiot, some people might say, because the only thing that they really needed for him, and really what Meghan needed from him, was the dosh to launch this, to put this together. But again, Meghan wanted to be sure that she was a sole focus point. She was the star of this particular product and brand. And so Harry was left dangling in the background, just making his short cameo appearance. But that wasn't enough to make the brand take off. And then on top of that, this now happened. The other problem now that Meghan has is simply this. You see, stars will not promote. And as we saw recently, Serena Williams, her good friend, being offended by a few cotton wool balls. Meanwhile, of course, all blonde hair and certainly a different skin tone, perhaps just a photograph. Who knows? You see how nutty these people are. And they have to film it and let you know. Now, the problem that, of course, Meghan has is the diminishing, shall we put it kindly, a list of celebrities that now want to be associated with a failing brand. If you remember, people like Nachos and her friend couldn't wait to tell you this was almost the second coming of Jams. I mean, breakfast was perfect now because Meghan had ordained to put out some slop in a jar. You get the picture. And I mean that because I've seen some of the videos, and when they open those jams, it's not firm, it's not rich, is it? Now, she's starting out, you have to give a little bit of leeway. But either way, the problem that you now have, it goes back to where will people find to keep going, to keep buying the brand? Now, behind the scenes, I can tell you once again, people are trying to convince Meghan that, in fact, she should now ditch the As Ever brand. Right, so we've had American Riviera Orchard and now As Ever. And the idea really is it should be something marketed around her name, which is what I've told you previously. So it should be like meghanmarkle.com, Meghan Markle Home, or something of that level. Now, it's a little bit like whatever you are, whether you are like a pop star of yesteryear. Many people will remember the brilliant British pop star Shane Fenton. But for my era, a little bit later down the line, he was forever Alvin Stardust, and he had a big hit with a track called Pretend. But the thing was, previous to that, it had a big hit with tracks like My Cuckoo, completely changing his name, his look. He went from like a sort of Mersey beat look right through now to this leather clad guy with the gloves on, with the rings sparkling, menacing sort of, campery sort of look, but it worked. And that's really what turned his career around again. This is what people apparently behind the scenes inside Meghan's camp believe could happen. They say there's no bigger brand because of everybody writing about it every single day than the name Meghan Markle. And I would say that that's true, and magazines, and we have this, don't we, with Catherine, the Princess of Wales, not so much over here in the United Kingdom, but particularly in other areas of the world. They still refer to Catherine as Kate Middleton. And I've told you on the show before, right, chums, that this is because of the algorithm. In other areas of the world, they won't type in the words Princess of Wales, Princess Catherine, or the right moniker. So they just look for Kate Middleton, and that's what shifts up the magazine. Meghan apparently is slightly warming to the idea, but wants to still remove the name. So could it not just be Meghan? Well, the problem that you've got with that is you've got pop stars, Meghan Trainor, you've got TV personalities, you've got Megyn Kelly. It doesn't work, even though they're differently spelt. You see how this really is now a problem. And this is what's going on behind the scenes. The other thing, which is now obviously on the plate, is simply this, because as you remember, I told you a couple of days ago, Meghan, of course, had the opportunity, apparently, to be shortlisted for this particular award for a podcast show that really nobody was interested in. This time around, though, for the company Lemonada. And what's interesting again with Lemonada is obviously she's in the shortlist, etc. But does anybody really know the name Female Flounders or Founders or whatever it was called? You don't, right? You just know Meghan, right? And, you don't even bother with the Duchess of Sussex stuff. That's the thing. Now, the other option really is this, and this is what's sort of been spelled out to Meghan, and to me, this is where this gets really interesting. She could either pause this whole brand, and I love that phrase, don't you? It's never a failure, chums, it's a pause, Meghan's pausing the brand, because so busy, mom of two, and that would be the story. Meghan, very busy, children coming up to school age, she just couldn't make it all work. You can't have it all, that sort of stuff. Move the goalposts again. You see again how this works. Now, that's the number one idea. The second idea, and this is really because, and I think this is kind of a dangerous idea, but probably would work. And again, I have to say allegedly. I mentioned this before, that Meghan's hinting on the world of fashion. And the thing with fashion is it's quite easy to do. really, because when you see all of these reality stars that have designed their own range, right? Basically, a very experienced designer comes along, shows you the ones, which would you wear, da 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 da. They slap your name on it and suddenly it's designed and curated. I think that's the new phrase, isn't it, chums? Curated by them. So Meghan could make money that way if you wanted to go down the fashion route. And Meghan hinted upon this on that Bloomberg chat, if you remember. And what's interesting about the Bloomberg chat is it was under the banner of Bloomberg Originals. Now, as I said to you before, and many of you would totally agree on this, I'd never heard of this, you know, and I'm across the media a lot, but I just never heard of it. And I thought, right, okay. But when you look at Meghan's, it didn't really, you know, I mean, the viewership should be a lot more considering the level of exposure that she has on a daily basis. So again, one would say, why is this not successful? So the idea of now just going into a fashion brand and basically saying, well, I'm now going to go down the fashion route and I could have put my name to certain things. Now, again, you can do this, you know, lots of celebrities do it, and it's finding the right fashion person, or indeed claiming that you've suddenly taken a course yourself and you can do it. I wouldn't be surprised if very soon we learn that Meghan's a serial knitter and she always is darning Prince Harry's socks once they get a hole in it, and it was something that she wanted to do. Do not forget, of course, though, that Meghan didn't want to do this a couple of years back because she wanted to break the glass ceiling and have her seat at the table. And if you didn't have a seat, you brought your own knife and fork, you know, that sort of claptrap, you know, that sort of thing. But that's the route that they're now trying to go down because they believe that jam and crepes and wine are too expensive to produce on the level of the sales level. But if you go down a route saying you suddenly have a bit like Rita Ora, who is, you know, pop star from many years ago now, but really just a brand name, very, you know, doesn't really bother the charts that much, right? Rita went with a massive discount chain over here, Primark. And people go, ooh, you know, hardly Harrods, dear. But the thing is, it's sold because of that generation that are now young moms and maybe, you know, get your first jobs. They may have bought her 10, 12 years ago and suddenly they remember her. Now, if Meghan could sort of swallow pride, perhaps somewhere like Primark could fit her very well. Dressed like a Duchess, you know, this sort of thing. I'm giving you that for free, Meghan, because I know you watch these, right? Now, what's interesting about this is where they're now at to try and replace Meghan, her branding, and where she goes next. As I mentioned at the start of the video, being, of course, a Duchess of disaster. It's not. One of the most telling things that Meghan and her team believe is this. Sarah Jessica Parker closed recently her footwear, you know, company, website, whatever you want to call it. And when you think about it, Sarah Jessica Parker, I've met her on a number of occasions, is a powerhouse in the world of fashion. I mean, not the sort of thing that you and I might want to trot around to little in, but nonetheless, you know, she knows exactly how to command that sort of fashionista look. Now, the fact that she closed down her shoe store after 10 years tells you that the luxury market is in free fall. And this is really to do with the bigger picture, actually, that people are now looking and thinking that was a luxury when people had money. They're certainly not going to splash out on a brand name now. Behind the scenes, according to a source, Meghan's team think the time would be right now for her to launch into this bracket. I'm not talking shoes, but clothes. You see how this works. Pivoting away. And Meghan introduced you to this in the Bloomberg Originals. Remember, she said, well, fashion's something that I've always been interested in. And of course, many people pick her fashion choices to shreds. I've often said, chums, I'm not a fashionista. I don't get the baggy trousers look. I don't get a lot of the stuff. But of course, fashion goes in a circle, doesn't it? What I do see is a lot of people now looking very similar to David Bowie in the 1970s. But of course, you look and think, right, yeah, all of that's come back. The bell bottoms, the platform shoes, everything comes a circle if you're around long enough. But of course, Meghan still has to sell that. Now, the only way to sell this, really, is by royal association. And Netflix know this. As I've said to you before, the only reason they're clinging on to Meghan Markle is really for the Prince Harry doc and perhaps something else further down the line. Because as each idea becomes less and less interesting, and Meghan herself, you can see the fact that she's not bothered about doing these certain things because, you know, she puts up Instagram posts and then very quickly, you know, it's meaningless. It doesn't sell. sell anything. Every post has to be about your brand, you know, whether you've, you know, tasted the latest wine, did you make any crepes over the bank holiday, what was the end of summer like, is this a great way of celebrating the return of autumn? I'm giving you all of these, Meghan, but it's that simple. Now, the social media team, as we know, were gone. So Meghan is now doing this herself, which is a bit of a worry, to say the least. Because if you don't know that, and goes back to the actress in Meghan, you know, and I use that term loosely, but she's given words. And she looked quite good, you know, on that show, but she's just got words, she says them, and that's it. And the bigger problem that you have with that is if you have to think of your own words, it's not that simple. You don't know how to curate it, how to get it out there, how to make it palatable for people. Now, moving forward, as I've said, the bigger issues that she's now got are two things coming up. She's got the holiday show, which is still not in production, which is still not knocked together by any shape or form, right? 3 months in, well, 2.5 really, when you think, because it has to be in the can by the end of November. We're now in the beginning of October at the time of recording this. And there's no ideas, no firm ideas, because Meghan really doesn't know what to do. The team literally are on eggshells, because if they get it wrong, they get it wrong, you know, and then somebody else gets the bullet and the revolving door of Archwell seems to fall apart, you see. Now, again, this bit I just find fascinating because it all pivots back to the royal connection. Recently, we were teased with this brand new documentary film on Apple with Eugene Levy and, of course, His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, Prince William. And there was just this lovely moment where he's talking about how Windsor meant a lot to the late Queen, and we all knew that, didn't we? I mean, I just, you know, I thought she was terrific. But the thing is, you do think of Windsor Castle and Queen Elizabeth, and he said he often thinks about her there and how it's been represented. And he presented this in a very palatable, friendly way, honouring her wonderful memory, but also highlighting the fact that things move on. And this helps the brand of William and Catherine because they've received, you know, unanimous support for their charitable endeavours and a record year of donations. Whereas you look at Archwell, where's that, you see, because of the knock-on effect of the negativity of Centre Barley and all that sort of stuff. And Meghan not coming out supporting things, seemingly, if it doesn't really do her any good. She shot off, as we know, from Invictus to launch her brand and really didn't hang around long enough to make a dent. And again, this is where you have major problems in the break and the branding of Meghan. Now, as I said, where we're actually at the time of recording this is interesting because the holiday show has to become in the bag, right? We've got to get that going. And she has a bigger problem because the later she leaves it and the production takes longer, what their idea is to get the show out earlier than Catherine's annual carol concert from the beautiful setting of Westminster Abbey, which is just a feast to behold and the start of our Christmas for many of us over here in the United Kingdom. And she puts together a great show. Does Catherine do that? Yes. Does she do it alone? No, she has a lot of help. But the original ideas come from Catherine, you know, who she would team up with, whether she was playing the piano, the guests that she'd like there to be represented, to be given a wonderful treat on that day, you know, young children, guides, all that sort of stuff. She's very, very active in this. The problem that you've got with Meghan is she needs to get her show out there very quickly, or else that will be a ratings battle that she certainly won't win. And as Netflix now have pulled heavily back from Meghan Markle and said, you know, as a case-by-case basis, this show is not going to be a success. And I'm not being negative, it's just not going to be a success. If you look at the other shows, you're going to have to do something radically different. And I've been told that it's kind of more of the same, just with a few baubles and people singing carols. So really, where are you going to go with that? Now, as I said at the start of the video, what's interesting with Meghan Markle is she is the Duchess of Disaster, but one Duchess who created disaster also created herself to be very, very wealthy. That's right, the Duchess of York, Sarah Ferguson. And if Meghan Markle was looking for a template into how to do it right up until this rather disastrous moment that's now engulfing the Duke and Duchess of York, well, Sarah Ferguson was it. But once again, she blew it. Anybody else agree? Sean in the very heart of Kensington.